Hello and welcome to another edition of Empathy at the Table. I'm really excited today. This is something I've been looking forward to for weeks. And I'm delighted to introduce you to Kamal Gupta. Kamal is a highly successful money manager, professional blackjack player, a consummate negotiator, and he's the author of Play It Right, a memoir that chronicles his journey from India to America, from computers to gambling, culminating in a quarter century on Wall Street. He's a second book that's in the works, and that will detail his negotiating philosophy and recount his adventures as a behind-the-scenes negotiator. Wow. So we're going to unpack that today, and I'd like to welcome you, Kamal, to Empathy at the Table.
Hi, Tony. It's great to be here.
Fantastic.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
Thank you very, very much for joining us. So let's just jump straight in. You're a computer scientist by trade, is what you studied.
I was an electrical engineer followed by a computer scientist. Yes.
Right. And I'm interested to understand what's the motivation to go into gambling? Is it the ego? Is it the money? Is it winning, beating the guy? What's the motivation for a computer scientist to go into this world?
Well, the starting point for getting into gambling was it was not that I was looking for gambling as an outlet. It's just that I was really frustrated with computer science as a field, and I went to I got an undergrad in electrical engineering, came to America to do a master's in computer science, started working for Oracle and so on. But the whole time I knew this was not my life. Like I was not interested in computers. I didn't like programming. I didn't like sitting in a cubicle and punching on a keyboard all day long. So I wanted to do something differently. And I recounted my memoir, like over the years, the years that I worked in the computer industry, I tried out lots of different things. Like I tried being a waiter in a restaurant. I took up sailing. I had a whole bunch of other activities that I pursued. I thought about opening a restaurant. I wanted to do something other than computers. So I was always seeking some other activity that would occupy my time. And one of those was skiing. So when I was living in San Francisco, on one of my ski trips to Lake Tahoe, a friend of mine that I'd gone there with took me to a casino and showed me this game called Blackjack, and I played for a few hands, lost some money, and then I came back to Oracle, where my then boss heard that I had played Blackjack and said, well, the game can be beaten. Now that was the trigger for me. When I figured out that the game can actually be beaten, and I read a whole bunch of books, and one of them is $1 Million Blackjack. And then I was hooked because I've always had a mathematical background. I understood the odds and probabilities of the game. So once I had convinced myself that the game can be beaten, then the question was, can I do it? So I played gambling. To me, was a challenge. Apart from there's a whole element of David versus Goliath, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I was fascinated by the game of blackjack and by the fact that what really bothered me about casinos was that they kicked out skillful card counters, skillful blackjack players. It's a fate that I suffered on several occasions. I've been kicked out of some of the finest casinos in Reno and Las Vegas. And to me, that was offensive. I mean, if you're offering a game, you should, you can't kick somebody out for their having the audacity to use their brain while playing the game. So you only want people to come into your establishment and play the game without thinking. Doesn't seem right to me. So to me, it was a combination of trying to beat the casinos, and to see if I can actually do this or not. The game was fascinating, and my entire life I've been fascinated by games. So the motivation was so much. I was looking for something else other than computers, and I just happened to run into blackjack. And when I found it can be beaten, I was hooked.
So I want to make sure we bring as many listeners along this journey as possible. Let's take a step back. Blackjack is obviously it's a card game that's played, and you say it's played it's not person against person. It's against the casino. And you mentioned card counting. Can you explain what that actually means in the context of blackjack?
So blackjack, it can be played from anywhere from 1 to 8 decks in a shoe, right? So, most typical games are 8 decks, but the principle is easily explained using 1 deck. Whereas whenever a hand is dealt in blackjack, the cards that come out are put in a discard pile on the side, and they don't get used again until the next shuffle. So if you can sort of somehow keep track of the cards that are coming out, for instance, if you're playing with one deck, let's say the first 4 cards that have come out are aces, hypothetically, you know with 100% certainty no more aces are coming out. And that affects the odds of the game going forward. Likewise, if no aces have come out for the first 48 cards, you know the last 4 cards. I mean, these are very extreme examples, but the right answer is somewhere in between the two. Whereas by keeping track of the cards, by assigning weights to individual cards, you know whether the remaining deck or remaining decks are rich in high cards or low cards. And the way Blackjack works, if there are low cards in the shoe, that's better for the house. And if there are high cards, that's better for the player. So the idea is to figure out what is the distribution of cards left in the cards that are yet to be played. And you can do that by keeping track of the cards that have come out. So by definition, we know what the mix of cards is going in. So if you subtract the cards that have come out, you know what's left in the shoe. So you know what the probabilities of the next hand are. So if the odds are in your favor, you bet as much as you can without getting thrown out of the casino. And when the odds are in the house's favor, you bet as little as you can. So the idea is to fluctuate your bets as the odds fluctuate between you and the casino, which is a lesson can be applied to in life as well as financial markets. So that's how you count cards. You keep track of the cards that have come out. That gives you a clue as to what's left in the deck and what the odds are for the next hand. And these odds fluctuate wildly, throughout the show.
And you do this in real time as the cards are being dealt.
You have to do it in real time because not only do you have to count your own cards, even though you're playing against the casino and not against other players, the 5 other people who might be on your table, their cards affect the odds just as much as yours. So not only do you have to count your cards and the dealer's cards, also those other 5 players' cards. And it's really it's a challenging proposition, which is why, very few people can actually pull it off. And which is why casinos offer the game, even though it can be beaten, is because they know very few people will be actually able to beat it on a consistent basis. And if they find them, they'll kick them out anyway.
So what does that look like, being kicked out? Did they literally just come up to you and say, "Sir, can you leave our establishment?"
Well, I'll tell you the first time it happened, and I recount it in my book when I was playing at the Bally's Casino in Reno, and I get a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there's like a fairly, 60-year-old distinguished-looking gentleman standing there, flanked by 2 big burly bodyguards. I mean, now, I'd been playing for almost a year now. This was the first time I was getting kicked out. Maybe because my stakes had gotten higher. And he says, "Sir, can you please step away from the table?" I said, "Why?" He said, "You know why." And obviously, I knew why. So obviously I still played dumb. I said, I don't understand. He said, "Listen, don't play any games with me. You know what you're doing. We know what you're doing. Just take your chips and leave." So they don't confiscate your chips. So the amount of money that I had on the table, that was still mine. I could go and... So I said, "So you would like me to leave?" He said, "Yeah." So I take my chips, and I'm reeling because it's the first time this has happened to me. And second, third, fourth time, I was a little more prepared. I take my chips, walk over to the cashier's cage, give her the chips, and she's laying out the $100 bills to give to me. I mean, the cameras are watching all this. And in the back of the cashier's cage, I see the same gentleman who's thrown me out. In the book, I call him my executioner, walking, behind her. And I just on a whim, I said to the lady counting the change, the bills, saying, "Who is that, by the way?" She said, "Oh, that's Bill. He's the shift manager." Basically for the whole casino that session. So I said, "Can I speak to him?" So she said, "Yeah, sure." I mean, she goes and talks to him, and he actually says, "Hold on for a second." And he comes out and meets me 5 minutes later, and we have a very pleasant conversation, and I ask him, what happened there? He said, "Listen, Mr. Gupta." And back then I was still using my real name. So I learned how to change that in the future. "You're just too good. We can't let you play." And the one burning question I had at the point in time is how did you catch me? How did you... I mean, now there's no point in pretending that I'm not counting cards. I mean, there's no... they know I'm counting cards. I know I'm counting cards. We might as well just have it all out in the open. So I said, "How did you figure out, that I was counting cards?" He said, "We've been watching you for 6 months.
Wow.
And we have a card counter. And now this can all be done with, not facial pattern recognition and all that stuff. But this is 30 years ago. And he said, we have a card counter on staff. He comes in during my shift, which was early morning, and he sits in the sky, in the eye in the sky, which is watching in the security room, and he's watching you play, and he's counting the deck along with you. And if 20 or 30 times your bets go up and down in sync with him, it's not a coincidence. So, but
Wow.
I'm shocked it took them 6 months, but so they said, so I said, can I come back? I said, yeah, maybe in a few years. I never went back.
So they say, once you're lucky, twice you're good. I mean, you had 103 consecutive positive returns on Wall Street.
Yes.
So you're more than good. I mean, that's not luck at all. So
that wasn't luck.
Your winning strategy from the casino to Wall Street. Can you share?
Well, that's exactly right. That's what made me different on Wall Street. Like, most people come to Wall Street thinking they're going to make a lot of money. And yes, it is a high-paying industry. But my entire motivation in coming to Wall Street was to play this game called financial markets, about which I knew nothing. And so I knew that I had no interest in playing this game unless, just like Blackjack, the odds could be turned in my favor. Now, in Blackjack, it's very simple. You can pick up a book and it'll show you exactly how to count cards, and the math can be proven. But for financial markets, there is no such tool. Like, anybody who can beat the market on a consistent basis will never write a book explaining exactly how it is done. So I knew in the U.S. mortgage market, which is where I was working, I knew I would have to develop a method from scratch. And that took me 7 years. So from early 1993 to late 1999, 24/7, I thought about the mortgage market, trying to figure out what is the right way to manage money such that, just like Blackjack, I mean, there'll be swings, but in the long run, you'll come out ahead. And at the time, I'm not thinking about 103 and 0 or anything like that. I thought, when I first started managing money, I thought if I can be, every year, I can have 9 positive months and 3 negative, that would be great, because that's a net positive of 6, and that's enough to, keep you going. This 103-month streak, which is absolutely mind-boggling, and I lived through it, but when I look back, I still can't believe it happened. And it was brought to end in September of 2008, because of the whole Lehman Brothers crisis. But the reason that streak endured is because I had a method, I believed in it, and I was very disciplined in executing that method, just like I was in Blackjack. So.
So we've had a conversation before, and I've read the kind of preview of your book, and it actually says in the book that you took on the casinos and you took on Wall Street without selling your soul to the devil.
Yes.
Who's the devil?
Oh, sure. So what is the devil? I mean, a one-word answer is greed. Like, even though I have, for the last 3 decades, I've been working in the worlds of low finance, which is casinos, and high finance, which is Wall Street, I have never been motivated by money. And I think if you look back in terms of on Wall Street, how people sell their souls to the devil is they're motivated by money and not the game. And I think people don't understand what a huge difference that is, because there are many ways to make money, right? But there's only one right way to play the game. And to me, whether I was gambling or managing money on Wall Street or negotiating, at every step I'm focused on the process and how the game is being played. And the only thing I care about is playing the game well and to the best of my ability. And I know that if I do so, money will follow.
So when we started conversing, it was around the area of what as you know, Lee and I call emotionally intelligent negotiation, and this is, for us, it's the idea of looking at the role that emotions play in our negotiations. Being, strong enough and assertive enough to be able to advocate for yourself or advocate for those that you're negotiating against. But fundamentally, we have a standpoint that if you look at the the counterpart as an enemy, you come in with a certain skill set, with a certain mindset. If you look at the other person as either neutral or even a potential collaborator, that gives you options from another position. But I think you and I, maybe there was a fundamental kind of diversion there, where you 100% believe the counterpart
1000%.
is your enemy.
Well,
expand on the gift and maybe some of the costs of that approach to negotiation.
Well, it goes back to my blackjack days. There's no question the casinos were my enemy.
Yeah.
Because I felt like they were treating gamblers unfairly. They're offering a game. If you can come and beat them by using your brain, they should let you play. They shouldn't kick you out. It was highly unfair. And unfairness, a fight against unfairness is a constant running theme in my life and in my memoir. So to me, the fact that that element was unfair carried on into my negotiating life, because I feel fundamentally corporations are deeply unfair in terms of how they treat employees, especially over the last 3 decades. And we can go into all the systematic changes that have happened in America, in the corporate world. But I absolutely believe that, and I'm not picking on any individual. I'm talking about the whole corporate edifice. That's my enemy. And I believe, just like blackjack is a zero-sum game, poker is a zero-sum game, contract negotiations and employment negotiations, and by the way, that includes when you're getting hired or you're getting fired, or for that matter, even the wording of a contract. These are all zero-sum games, whereas every clause that benefits the corporation hurts you, and vice versa. And when you're negotiating against, big business, and specific, I'm only talking about large businesses, like employing hundreds of thousands of people, not small. I mean, all my negotiations are an individual going against a David going up against Goliath. And I really feel the playing field is unfairly tilted in favor of corporations in America, especially over the last 3 decades. And I feel that, this may sound radical, but I really believe it wholeheartedly, that I think the only thing corporations care about is higher profits. And employees are a tool to getting those higher profits, whereas employees may have different objectives. And so in that sense, yeah, I definitely believe that employment-related negotiations, whenever I help an individual, I believe the corporation that I'm negotiating against is my enemy. It's a zero-sum game in the sense that every dollar that migrates from the corporations to my client, I call them a client, even though I never accept any money for my services. I do it purely for the joy of the game. I believe it scores a point in our favor. It's a game, and if you view negotiating as a game, just like you view blackjack or money management as a game, well, games have winners and losers. I mean, a poker hand, which is negotiating, is a lot like poker because it's a game of incomplete information. A poker hand usually only has one winner. I mean, in very rare cases, both people have the same hand, but by and large, 2 people don't win a poker hand. Same thing with negotiating against, big business. I think it's an unfair fight, and my role as a negotiator from behind the scenes, because corporations don't know that I'm involved, is to level the playing field a little bit more than it was. And
I think it's important at this point to what you've done is you've segmented out a vertical, right? So, and I think that's really important that you focus on negotiating. Corporate negotiations. So it's contract negotiations, it's employment negotiations with big corporates, which is just one specific vertical of negotiation. And so what I'm hearing you saying is that you believe that there's a specific strategy when it comes to seeing them as the enemy. It benefits you. It benefits the small person, the David in the situation, to see them as the enemy. Is that correct?
I mean, I think you're right about it being a vertical and a slice of the negotiating market, because when you're talking about mergers and acquisitions or people negotiating with a buyer and supplier, a supplier or a vendor, you're talking about 2 entities which are roughly of similar size. You don't have this huge power mismatch that you have between a lone individual playing blackjack in a casino or a lone individual negotiating with the JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs of the world. I mean, so that's why it's a very different game. And you're right, it's a very narrow slice of the negotiating, universe, but it is the single most important negotiation of anyone's life. Negotiating what we manage to get paid for our work affects everything in our life, from your house to your car to your education to your healthcare. It all depends on how you can negotiate. So while it is a narrow slice, it is the most important slice in any individual's life in terms of
Yeah.
their negotiating. And, with power more and more being concentrated in fewer and fewer firms, there is every possibility that your next employment negotiation will be against a large company, not a small one. I mean, this is a little known statistic, but 0.3% of corporations in America employ more than half the private sector workforce. So that just tells you how lopsided the
Yeah.
game is.
But when you look at it, when you're talking about negotiating against a corporation, it kind of dehumanizes the whole negotiation process, right? And whereas if you're, for example, being hired by a specific company, it's a person who's hiring you, and
Yes.
Surely there are benefits in being able to use some level of empathetic, emotionally intelligent communication with that person, who may then go on to be able to advocate for you in a much more positive way.
Sure, I would agree with that, but I don't view the individual I'm dealing with as my enemy. I
Okay.
view the whole corporate, just like Bill at Bally's was not my enemy. It was the entire casino edifice that was my enemy, that decided to kick me out, right? It wasn't just his decision, right? There's a same thing with corporations. You're never just dealing with the person you're dealing with, because the real levers of power in a corporation are pulled by senior management, human resources, lawyers. The person you're dealing with is probably a mid-level manager, is like a car salesman who every time you make an offer, he has to go running to the back office and seek approval from his managers to decide how to respond. So I view that person as a conduit. And yeah, sure, you can have some empathy for him, but he's not the one. The problem with dealing with a corporation is you never deal with the people who are
Right.
who have the ultimate power to decide your fate, what you're going to
Right.
get paid, whether you're getting hired or not. Sure, that person has some input, but he doesn't have. I mean, if I had a penny for every single time I've heard a mid-level manager say it was out of my hands, I would have a lot of pennies.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, you can have empathy for that individual, but I'm talking about the corporate edifice as my enemy, not that individual. And in virtually any case that I've been involved in, I don't even know who those people are. It's the corporation. It's like the entity is my enemy, not individuals.
Yeah.
But
So, in your experience, then, Kamal, these heads of captains of industry that are in the shadows that we never get to see, how do they negotiate with each other?
I don't know, actually. I have not been. I think there is an element of collusion in big business in terms of, I don't know if you remember a long time ago, I think it was Apple or Google, they had like a no hire pact or something like that, which I think is blatantly illegal. I mean, there was a famous email that goes around on LinkedIn about Steve Jobs complaining to some big executive. I thought we had or maybe Microsoft, or I don't know which company it was. I don't remember, saying that I thought we had an understanding we were not going to recruit from each other, which is mind-boggling to me that somebody would put that in an email. So, and I think it permeates Wall Street, or even low-level restaurant workers and fast food workers, where there has been a trend away from hiring people full-time, because when you hire people for more than 20 hours a week, you have to pay them benefits and health insurance. So how about let's all, as restaurant owners, decide we'll only offer people 20 hours a week job, so that any individual who wants to work for 40 hours a week, which most of them do, will have to get 2 jobs. So by having part-time workers, everybody gets to save on healthcare, costs.
Yeah.
The corporation I'm talking about. But
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
deeply unfair. And there was a New York Times article a couple of years ago about a fast food worker who desperately wanted to work full-time, but the company just wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when they talk about not finding workers, to me, it's just a question of just pay them a little bit more. You'll find workers.
So here's a scenario for you, right? You help somebody who's a middle manager. You help them negotiate their work conditions. You help them negotiate a very, very comfortable package that they couldn't have negotiated on their own. And then they get promoted, and they suddenly
Yes.
they get on the other side. Now, what happens then in that scenario?
That's a great point, because I think I talk about in my second book, I talk about the fact that it's not unusual for a person who was a client of mine to become my opponent. Sometimes it takes less than a week. And, and I have stories about this, whereas I help an individual get to a corporation. I mean, we negotiate a great deal and he goes and starts working there. Now he wants to recruit his assistant.
Right.
And she has watched me help him negotiate. So he turns to me for help. And so obviously I'm going to help her. And, and there have been numerous instances of me negotiating for a person and then turning around and negotiating against them, because whenever they're hiring themselves, now they've become a mid-level manager, right, that I'm negotiating against. And they're not my enemy, even though sometimes they felt like this. They take it personally. I said, it's not personal. I mean, you're representing the corporation. I'm negotiating against the corporation. You just happen to be in the middle. I mean, you're not the one pulling, with the
This
ultimate
is
power.
fascinating to me.
So yes, there have been, in vast majority of the cases, my former clients don't figure out that I'm their opponent. But there have been instances where people have figured it out. And even like as recently as our conversation, there were situations where, people I was, negotiating against are people I have helped negotiate in the past, like 10 years ago. So to me, it's not personal, right? I am helping an individual negotiate against a corporation. And if my past client, is now representing the corporation, well, they're my opponent now.
What it sounds like to me is, I always remember a quote from Floyd Mayweather, the boxer, where, he says it's not business, it's personal. So, it's not personal, it's business.
Oh, 100%.
So he'll fight somebody, he'll do whatever it takes. And then at the end, they'll hug and they'll be friends, and they'll be fine, because those were the rules of the game. And it was understood that those were the rules of the game. It was nothing personal.
Well, I completely agree with that. It's not personal, but nobody can hug a corporation.
Yeah.
So
when does the game end, Kamal? That's the thing.
It doesn't.
It seems like it just perpetuates, and then it creates people who distrust people, and then it just keeps going on and on and on, and it's a never-ending cycle.
I completely agree. It is a never-ending cycle, because it's like Blackjack is an infinite game. It goes on forever. Wall Street financial markets are an infinite game. There's no end to it. You can keep managing money for as long as you feel like doing it. Same thing with negotiating. There will always be corporations. I mean, I'll tell you how this changes, which there is no shot of it ever happening. But I can create an utopian scenario where corporations start to put people before profits first.
Yeah.
And that is never going to happen. So which is why I don't expect it to change. And I actually have a line in my second book where I'm saying that the reason my negotiating principles work across the globe, because corporations, one corporation can be very different from another corporation. But when it comes to putting profits before people, there is no difference between a corporation in Asia or Europe or America.
I have to see it from a different angle, right?
Okay.
And I'll share why. A lot of my negotiations are with, I work with founders. So I work on a program called School of Founders at a business school, and I'm dealing with companies that are maybe between 4 and 9 years, and they're looking to scale up. And we work directly with the founders, with the owners of the companies. And one of the key tenets of the program that we're teaching is this idea of how do we change the narrative instead of just focusing on profits, which is important. It is very important. But how do we widen that scope and create a scenario where our businesses are sustainable, meaning that in 10, 15, 20, 30 years' time, they're still relevant and they're still adding value. And the conversation is starting. I'm not saying it will happen in our lifetime, but I'm seeing some green shoots of founders who are purpose-driven, who are also have got the guts to turn and face some of the VCs, their investors, and say, well, look, this is where we're going. And VCs are starting to listen. VCs are actually starting to take note and investing in the well-being and health of some of the founders. I mean, it's a long journey, you're right, but I can see that happening from this side.
No, that's great news, because if you go back to the 1990s when all this began, I mean, a very dangerous ethos took hold in America, which is a CEO is only responsible to his share or her
Yeah,
share of shareholders and nobody else, not
yeah,
the country, not consumers, not customers, and certainly not the employees, you know. And so that absolved the titans of industry from any responsibility towards anyone other than shareholders. And so the share price of a company became the sole metric of
yeah,
success.
yeah,
And that's why you have Boeing ending up where it is right now. That's why you had the financial crisis. I mean, we can just go on and on forever
yeah,
about
yeah.
how that, I mean, that basically, that is also greed, right? Because it's easy to say I'm responsible only to my shareholders when I'm a CEO who's got boatloads of stock options that I benefit from if the stock goes up,
Yeah.
which is the root cause of all the outsourcing in America. I mean, so I think it's, I mean, I'm very glad to hear that people are thinking differently about it now. But in my experience, the larger, I mean, maybe this is true for this. I mean, I don't know the size of the companies you're operating with. Maybe this can be done in a smaller corporation much
Sure,
better than it can
sure.
be. And I don't consider small companies to be my enemy. I'm very clear about this. I'm negotiating against large companies with thousands of employees.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
those, I mean, we're talking about the biggest of the big, corporations in the world. And I just don't see how you can affect change in their culture. I'm
Right.
glad
Right.
you're having this
Right.
conversation. I mean, I'm assuming these founders, if you said they're 4 to 9 years in existence, these are still relatively small companies, I'm assuming.
Typically under 1,000 employees. Yeah.
Okay. So they're not, I mean, obviously nowhere near the size of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, or
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Googles of the world. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I typically would not be going up against those companies.
Right.
I mean, typically I'm going up against companies which either have a lot of people or have tens of billions of dollars in capital.
Right.
And by the way,
Right.
it doesn't have to necessarily, I mean, you can be a hedge fund with 25 billion that can be run by 250 people. So, I mean, I'm talking about companies with some serious clout in the marketplace.
Right. Right.
So I don't know how big a presence these companies have in the marketplace,
Yeah,
the ones you're working with.
you're quite right. I mean, they're increasingly, having more and more clout, but they're definitely not in the league of
But they're not
the
dominant in
established
the industry.
No, 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 no. These are incumbents,
Right.
and yeah, and it's for me. It's encouraging to see this. It's encouraging to see the discourse now turning towards these leaders are asking themselves, how do I go deeper as a leader before I go higher as a CEO, right? How do I start to do that? And I'm encouraged by that. I also wanted to ask you another question because I'm sure listeners would be really keen to know this. How do you manage your emotions when it comes to these high stakes situations that you find yourself in?
It's funny because I learned that while gambling. I mean, if you think about it, the highs and lows when you're gambling are very high and very low. I mean, it's impossible, no matter how well you play the game, to not have enormous losing streaks and similar winning streaks. So it's just that I was one of the few people who came on Wall Street having firm control over the two emotions that basically take people down in this industry, which is fear and greed. When you're fearful, you retreat, and when you're greedy, you may go for broke. I mean, and when you feel overconfident, you try to go for too much. When you're afraid, you try to settle for you might settle for too little. So I had learned how to overcome my emotions during my gambling years, because there's no better place to teach you how emotions can like destroy your game than a casino. And so it was that part of the game on Wall Street was not difficult for me because I had it under control before I showed up here. And the same thing with negotiating. I know how I play the game is the most important thing, and emotions get in the way of good decision making. And that's not to say there is no. I mean, I have a chapter devoted to anger in my book because you can use emotions to your advantage,
Right.
but you cannot allow emotions to dictate your play.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
just think about it. Any professional athlete or any game player or any chess player, I mean, no one plays the game emotionally. I mean, emotions not only cloud your thinking, they also betray your position. I mean, imagine an emotional poker player. He wouldn't last 5 minutes. I mean, so conquering emotions has come from practice and out of sheer necessity. I mean, there is no alternative. And trust me, I've been there. I've played blackjack emotionally, numerous times and paid the price for it.
Yeah.
But I can tell you one thing. In 20 years of managing money, I never gave into any emotions at all. And same thing holds true for my negotiations. I don't negotiate emotionally.
Well, I mean, it's really important to kind of state that emotions are a natural kind of part of who we
Oh,
are.
absolutely.
They're, data points of information, and what you've managed to do, and if you forgive me for saying, I did some research on you, and I found out that I love this story that you were diagnosed with arthritis at 18
Yes.
years old, right? And
15 years old.
Sorry, at 15, yeah. And that really, when I read that, bit of information, I thought, wow, this is somebody who really has managed to conquer whatever that feeling is, that and do it anyway. So maybe could you share a little bit about how maybe that experience of you overcoming adversity has helped you become such a, able to control your emotions?
I think it really has helped. I mean, when I look back, my kids once asked me, like, do you wish you didn't have arthritis? I said, no, I don't, because it made me who I am. And it started when I was 15, and it wasn't diagnosed till I was about 18 or 19 years old. And I found at age 18, when someone tells you that you're going to have physical pain for the rest of your life, and since, for the last 40 some years, I've been in constant pain every waking moment. And if that is not going to make you strong,
Yeah.
what is, So I tell, whenever I do book clubs, for my memoir, I always tell people, I am the perfect candidate for an opioid addiction because A, I have pain. I can easily get the prescription. And B, I have a very addictive personality. Like when I get obsessed with blackjack, I'm totally obsessed with blackjack. It's 24/7 my life. When I'm working on the mortgage market, it's literally at 2 a.m. I'm laying in bed twiddling my thumbs thinking about mortgages. So it's very all consuming for me. And same thing with negotiating. When I'm involved in a situation, it's all I'm doing. So the fact that I'm obsessive and have a very addictive personality and that I have physical pain, I should be addicted to opioids. But I'm not because, I realized early on, this is before, obviously 40 some years ago, there were no opioids, and this was in India anyway. But I sat down and thought about it when I was in college, when I was diagnosed, that like, what am I going to do with this pain? I mean, like, there's not much I can do. It's a genetic disease. I have no control over, what's going to happen to my body. I needed a hip replacement and all that stuff. And my neck, just so you know, is completely fixed. It does not move a half an inch up or down or left or right.
Wow.
Like, it's like the way I'm looking at you is the only way I can look at you. So if I have to look to my right, I have to turn like this. I cannot turn my neck at all. So it's not apparent when we're talking head on, but so I realized that I can't help what is the condition I have. And so what happens to you is not in your control, but how you react to it. And this is a perfect lesson metaphor for negotiating. How you react to what happens to you is completely in your control. So I decided very early on in my life that I was not going to let this disease define me. Yeah, whatever happens to my body happens. I'll deal with it, and I'll deal with the pain. And I think it made me tougher and stronger and let me deal with the casinos and Wall Street and these big corporations. I mean, and I think you have to be mentally tough to deal. I mean, gambling and hedge funds, forget negotiating for a minute. Gambling and working at managing money for hedge funds are two of the most stressful and difficult professions. I mean, there's a funny saying, gambling is a very difficult way of making easy money, So, I mean, and I don't think I would have survived in those industries if I had not been mentally toughened by arthritis.
Yeah.
And that carries over into my negotiating as well.
Well, Kamal, my dad always said, always leave them wanting more. And we are coming to the end of our conversation, and I definitely want more, and I'm sure the listeners would want more. What is it that you're working on right now, and how can our listeners find you?
The second question first. I have a website, and I shamelessly borrowed it from Michael Lewis's, website, which is michaellewiswrites.com. My website is not michaellewiswrites.com. It's kamalguptawrites.com. So you can reach me there. And in terms of what I'm working on right now is I've finished writing my second book, which is about negotiating. It's called Game Changer: Negotiating Tactics for Today's Workforce. And it's basically 16 chapters. Each chapter is a rule that I abide by in terms of how I negotiate. And so I sort of go into why the rule exists, what is the motivation behind the rule, and then I sort of illustrate the rule with real life examples from my own experiences negotiating. So basically, and then I'm close. I think the book it'll be a year before the book comes out. I'm in the last stages of, some publisher negotiations.
Okay.
So hopefully a year from now, the book will be available. So yeah, so right now I'm working on this book and helping people negotiate as always.
In the shadows.
In the shadows, right?
Yeah.
So I almost wanted to call the book The Shadow Negotiator because, I don't think anyone has, I certainly am not aware of anyone having done something like this as much as I have done, because over the last 25 years, I've done this hundreds of times, which is just an extraordinary, large number of negotiations.
Fantastic. Well,
So,
Kamal Gupta, may I thank you very much for joining us on Empathy at the Table. I will contact you outside of this because I do want to have a much deeper dive. But for our listeners, on behalf of our listeners, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this
thank you,
afternoon on
Andrew.
Empathy at the Table.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.